Welcome to Varied Voices, a thought-provoking podcast where true crime meets the fascinating depths of human behavior. Hosted by me, Stephanie.
And me, Patty.
This podcast brings together diverse perspectives on some of life's most intriguing questions. In each episode, we explore a wide range of topics that span the spectrum of human experience and societal norms. From the complexities of human relationships to what goes on in the mind of a killer in our true crime episodes.
This is episode 1, The Murder of Helen McPherson. Part 1, we're going to learn who Helen McPherson was from Doug McPherson, her son, and her daughter-in-law, Wanda. We're going to learn about her background, her personality and life achievements, her relationship with her family and her community. We get some personal anecdotes and memories from her son and daughter-in-law that are just priceless. And I do think it's important to really get to know who the victim of this crime was. Part 2 is going to be the case details from the reports of the deputies that were the first responders to the crime scene. Part 3 are going to be interviews with law enforcement from Indian River Sheriff's detectives and the Sheriff of Indian River County, Eric Flowers. Part 4 is going to be crime prevention tips, so you don't become a victim of this type of crime.
Part 1, Helen McPherson's life.
All right, well, welcome. We have Doug and Wanda McPherson with us today, and it's important that we get to know Helen, and I thought who better to tell us than her family. Doug, can you tell me about her early life, where Helen was from, when she got married, who she married, your dad, that type of thing? Can you share a little bit about her history with us?
Well, she was from Arkansas, and she came down here back during the Depression.
Oh.
And it was very, very difficult because you couldn't buy anything. And I remember them talking about they couldn't even get tires. Wow. And had a flat tire, and they went to a junkyard, and they found one that the guy gave them.
What year was that?
When she was first married, yeah.
Wow, and so, down. She's been in Vero that long.
We've been here almost all her life.
She baked pies and cakes.
Oh, yeah.
She was a baker.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it was
I mean, not by trade, but just that.
It was necessity to earn money at that point in time. You remember this was
literally
like
a
during,
baker.
the Depression, so they would sell that so they would have the money for groceries.
And they would sell it for $1.25.
Oh my! I wish I had one of those pies. I bet she was from scratch, right?
Very good cook. Yes, very good, and it was from scratch.
Yeah.
Did she enjoy baking her whole life?
Yeah, she always, of course, mothers are always a good cook.
Yes.
And then they came here and we went to Walbasso. Okay. And we lived there for a few years in a little old bitty house, and it's still there.
Oh, gosh.
We went and looked at it a month or so ago. And then their daddy went to work for the city, and we moved out to the airport in one of them old barracks because he had gotten hurt somehow in a little Jeep wreck when he was working for him. We lived there for years, and we watched the Dodgers play in an empty field out there before they even had the stadium. Yeah.
Oh, how interesting.
And you might tell them also the barracks we're referring to, this wasn't a base.
Right.
A military base at that time. I mean, and they moved in after the guys moved out, of course, but a lot of people may not know that.
Yes, that's true.
It was an interesting place to be in there because when you go take a shower, there was 20 showers in there. You could take whatever place you wanted, take a shower in there.
What an interesting place to grow up.
Yeah. And I was in the Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts was directly behind that in an old Quonset hut that the military used to live in or stay in or something. And I can remember when the airport was even a wooden hangar.
Really?
Yeah, it was all wood. Well, it had to have been in the 50s. Tuesday, we'd go to Walbasso. My mother would take us up there, and we'd go on the beach when we was kids. We'd spend with my uncles. My aunt, actually, the uncles were working, but we'd spend Tuesday on the beach in Walbasso, and then she'd bring us back home.
So I'm wondering, what was Helen's personality like?
Well, she was a lot like my mother, so, she fit in real good with my lifestyle, okay? She was very compassionate, very interesting person. When I came into the picture, she was into garage sales. She would always find the most interesting little article, and this was made way back when. It's worth this amount of money, but I only paid this much.
Oh, that's awesome.
But she was always the type of person that made you feel at home, never complained about stuff. She would feed you.
No
feed
enemies,
you.
right?
No enemies, no. And her name actually that she went by is Regine. Her name's Helen, but it's Helen Regine.
Okay.
Most people don't know that from the articles
So
and
she went by
things.
her middle name.
Yes.
Okay.
So, what kind of mother was Helen growing up?
With me growing up,
Now, did you have brothers and sisters?
yes, we had 2 brothers,
Okay, so there were 3 sons.
3 sons, right? And they're all still living.
Uh-huh.
And I ride my bicycle to school from way out there. And she'd always be welcome when we get home. But she was always, for some reason, real nervous about somebody breaking into when we was at that house out there. You know, I never did figure all that out. But there was always a nervousness in her that something.
Was that in the house on 49th?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Kind of a premonition, maybe.
Yeah.
Isn't that? You guys must have kind of thought about that.
Yeah,
I didn't know,
afterwards.
actually.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So what did she do? Did she take precautions because she was frightened at that?
Well, that's after my father was passed when all this started talking about it, you know.
So just brought on by the fact of being alone, living alone at that point?
Yeah, because she was living alone with her little dog and stuff like that, and she enjoyed animals, you know, the ones she had.
She had good neighbors. The neighbor next door would check on her, and they had good rapport. So there's always somebody that would be there to look after her, so to speak. I mean, they didn't come in all the time, but they
They
kinda kept
knew if she didn't stay in her routine.
Right.
What did she have a structured routine? She went to church, I think I
She
read.
right, she
was a
always
member
was
of the
going to
First
church, member of the
Baptist.
church, yes, making me go.
And you were a good son, and you did, right?
Yeah, I went.
Off of it.
Something that most of the guys could understand. Well, got drafted in the service.
Right after high school.
And of course, I went to Vietnam, and you know, you get
Thank you
really
for your service.
they really get nervous up there. I was behind the concertina wires, and them guys could go right through that wire to get to you. It was nothing to it, but I was really scared, you know, when I first got there. And she bought a .25 pistol, Smith & Wesson's. And I explained to her that she couldn't send it because they X-ray everything in tinfoil. She wrapped it in tinfoil and baked it in a cake and sent it to me.
And it got there?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh my gosh, I love that story. That's a mom.
Yeah. That's how she liked her kids.
Oh my gosh, I can relate. I'm a mom of 2 boys, and I've always said, if he's going to war, I'm going to be his ball and chain. He's got to take his mama with him.
She sure did that.
And that shows her dedication as a mom and how much she loved her son.
Yeah.
What challenges did Helen face in her life, if any, and overcome?
Most of it was money, because she pinched money their whole life because of where she, you know, all this was going on in the world when she was growing up.
Yeah, I've heard that about people that experience the depression,
Right.
that they were much more cautious.
Oh, a lot
and,
more.
And I think I heard more of those stories when the recession that we experienced hit. They said, we remember our parents kind of laughing at them because they were so frugal. But it's those experiences in life that form you, right? Absolutely. So she probably made $1 go a long way.
Yes.
That's where the garage sales came in. After we were married, I guess she got to know me a little bit better, but she'd bring little things over there, cute little things. I mean, things I'd never seen before, but attractive. It may not have cost a lot or anything, but I still have them too. Little adorable knickknacks or whatever.
Yeah, she saw it and thought of you.
Right.
So that's kind of the person that Helen was, very thoughtful.
Very.
And thinking of the ones she loves.
She was a people person too. Speaking of garage sales, she would like to meet people and talk a leg off of you. She, oh, hi there, and so, who's that? Well, we met at garage sales and they're coming over to eat.
And she remembered the names.
Oh, yeah.
See, I'm bad at that. I'll get to talk and I'll be thinking about the next question I want to ask them. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I go to introduce them. And then it's like, what? So that's great. That says a lot about that she really was a listener. Right.
Absolutely.
And very honest. Tell her about the peaches.
She had been at Target. She was shopping. She picked up some things, and she had got a can of peaches, but
Well, along with the other groceries,
Right.
she got home and found out she hadn't paid for it.
so she went back.
And she went back.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, she paid for them.
When I heard about this terrible crime, it just touched me so much. And, our hope is, Steph and I, and certainly the detectives, because we've chatted with them about this, that, that's number one on their list.
Good.
And we just have to get it solved for her. And just hearing you all tell me more about Helen, I just kind of feel like I know a little bit about her, and I think that that's so important. She's not just a name or just a crime that's happened in our community. She was a warm, loving mother. Was she a grandmother?
Yes.
How many grandchildren?
Oh, my.
Can you name them?
No. I couldn't tell you. There's many of them.
Yes, and she was close to her grandchildren.
There was times when the ones from northern Florida would come down, spend the weekend with her, and sometimes the grandchildren, if it was summertime, they might stay for the week and then go back. But yes, they enjoyed being with Grandma.
What did she do with the grandchildren when they
Took them
came?
garage selling.
Did she? And they probably loved it,
Don't you
right?
know? They would go to the beach and things like that. She was
Right.
entertaining.
So, what kind of lessons or values did Helen pass on to you both and her grandchildren?
Well, I would say the biggest thing is stretching the dollars and enjoying life. That was the basics. We enjoyed the family.
Well, I want to thank you all for giving us a glimpse into your lives and Helen's life, because I think that it's an important story, and we should begin with that, who she was. So thank you very much.
Part 2, the case details. This is the initial report to Helen McPherson's residence from Deputy D. Norman, who was the first responder to the scene. On July 15, 2006, at approximately 6:21 p.m., I was dispatched to 2666 49th Avenue in reference to a possible death of an 87-year-old woman with possible signs of forced entry and signs of violence to the victim. Sergeant Steve Trapp and EMS were also en route to the scene, and upon arrival, I observed Sergeant Trapp and Lieutenant Johnson, EMS, by the victim's bedroom door. The victim was lying on the floor with blood on her face. There was blood on the wall by the bed's headboard. Sergeant Trapp and myself conducted a quick search for additional victims or suspects. We then conducted an exterior search of the house. The scene was taped off, and the DB and ID units were notified. Notification time was 6:33 p.m. The point of entry appears to be a north exterior door leading from the carport to the kitchen. The screen was removed and the window was open. So this is important that she did not let anybody in. There was an intruder and he let himself in.
That is an important detail, for sure.
Investigation revealed that on this date, at approximately 5:45 p.m., Edna Lovett, the victim's next-door neighbor, went to the victim's house to check on her. She noticed that the exterior door window was open and the screen was removed. Lovett called out to the victim but did not get a response. Lovett returned home and called the victim's son, Doug McPherson. He and his wife, Wanda McPherson, responded to the scene. Doug stated that when he arrived at the scene, he observed the exterior door leading from the carport to the kitchen, and the door's window was opened and the screen was removed and lying against the wall. The door was locked, so he reached in and unlocked the door.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, so that means he went in and out of the window rather than just going through the door?
Right. I mean, if it were me, Steph, I open the window, unlock the door, and open the door and walk through it.
I know.
I mean, to me, there's some sort of effort to come in through the window. I mean, I don't know if the window was, a half window door or a full window door, but you're only going to have half of it you can enter through.
Right. That means that seems like he's making the access more difficult for himself.
Yeah, it's more effort, and I just find that so strange. Okay.
Yeah, me too. When he entered the house, he observed the victim lying on the floor, and he then exited the house. Oh my God, of course. Could you imagine? This is Doug, so he enters the house.
Oh, I can't imagine. I cannot imagine. And what a shame to find your mother in that state, and that's your last memory of her. And yeah, I think when I heard about this, my mother was 80 at the time. She's 98 now, but at the time she was 80, and I just thought, how awful. I, of course, called her and said, do not open the door to anyone. I mean, but you just don't expect something like this to happen to an 87-year-old woman. Oh my gosh. Heart goes out.
I also spoke with Wanda McPherson, who stated that on July 14th, so the night before, they were with the victim until approximately 8:40 p.m. They'd gone out to eat and returned to the house and watched TV until they left at 8:40 p.m. She also stated that approximately 1 week ago, from this past Wednesday, the victim had heard a noise during the night and had stayed up all night with the lights on.
Wow. So more than likely, this is the same person.
Right, like checking out her property, seeing what her patterns are, maybe.
Absolutely. I mean, you certainly could surmise that he knew something about the house. So was he a watcher? Was he a voyeur?
And it's really heartbreaking to me that this last week of hers was with this little bit of paranoia about her own safety.
Yeah, anxiety about it, and and it came true. Yeah.
The next day, she discovered the screen from one of the windows of the Florida room was removed and lying on the ground. And by the way, this Florida room is more like her front entry in looking at her house layout.
But he went to the door. I find that, again, I don't know why I'm harping on this, but okay, if it was that person, we don't know if it's a him or a her, and they went to the Florida room, removed the screen there, and they decided not to do it. They come back a week later, it's a totally different entry point, and it's a door, and you're climbing through the window. I don't know why, but I find that
Right, the
I'm
window
puzzled.
thing.
Yeah.
Wanda McPherson reinstalled the screen. She further stated that the victim was under the care of the Visiting Nurse Association, and they had visited her this past Thursday. So it was, I think, the day after they noticed the screen.
Okay.
Just a note on
Sure.
people who had been in and around her house. I spoke with Edna Lovett, and she stated that when she first went over to check on the victim, she noticed the screen removed out of the window, so she picked it up and placed it against the wall. She also stated that she observed the victim's newspaper lying in the driveway, so she picked it up and placed it in the carport. She further stated that the victim always gets up early and goes out and gets the newspaper. So obviously, like, something is wrong if you
the
don't
newspaper's
see.
sitting there in the evening.
She further stated that when Doug and Wanda McPherson entered the house, she also went inside, and when she saw the victim lying on the floor and the condition of the bedroom, she knew something bad had happened, and she immediately left the house. Thankfully, it sounds like she didn't actually see Helen.
Yeah, hopefully, because it's just something you wouldn't be able to erase.
I also spoke with a couple of the victim's neighbors, Lynn Webb and Lisa Han. They both stated that they did not hear or see anything unusual last night or this morning. Both individuals stated that most of the people in the neighborhood had been there for many years, except for one couple who moved in approximately 2 or 3 weeks ago. The only information they could provide was that they lived at the end of the street, possible address of 2746.
2746 49th Avenue. Again, 49th. So if anybody lived in that neighborhood at that time, it'd be nice if they had any information that they're thinking of maybe today, especially if they were a young kid living with their parents at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Like, your memory might be a little sharper on it.
Now we've got Sergeant Trapp, and I will read this overview. So on July 15th, 06, approximately 1830 hours, which is 6:30 p.m., I arrived at 2666 49th Avenue in reference to a medical call. Upon arrival, I met with Lieutenant Denise Johnson of EMS, who told me that upon her arrival, she had spoken to family members at the scene who found the deceased. Based upon the conversation, she alone entered the scene so as not to disturb any possible evidence and quickly determined the victim to have had expired. I then entered the house with her so as to determine if a crime had occurred, and without fully entering the master bedroom, I determined this to be a crime scene. Well, that must have been pretty evident. Johnson left the house, and D.S. Norman entered with me. We cleared the house and found there was no one else at home. Upon entering the carport entrance into the kitchen, I saw that the screen had been removed, and it appeared the point of entry and or exit was the open window in the kitchen door. Oh, this is interesting. A curtain rod was lying on the floor just inside the door, and it appeared to have been dislodged from the same kitchen door. Well, we get back to that. So we don't know if he came through there and knocked it down at that time. If he did, there would have been a considerable amount of noise. And it could have awakened Helen at that time. We don't know.
Right. And in just speculating, I think if I were Helen, and I'm alone in my bed at whatever time of night, and I hear that sound, I'm not necessarily going to go check it out.
I'm not going to it. Right. You just kind of freeze because you're waking up. You were scared a week ago that
Yeah,
there was
she
a
has that in her
possible
mind.
intruder. So, again, I don't know why I keep looking at that, but I just find it odd.
The entry point is odd, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, if it's the same person that came again to the sunroom, they decided that the door entry would be easier, but then why not make it easier by actually using it as a door?
Or they did, and they just left that window open, which is very messy.
Well, they'd have to reach back in and lock it.
Yeah, and maybe they did that. And,
Why,
you
though?
know, so many. I don't know.
Why?
No, but
why.
if you're going to be careful and do that,
Why would you? Okay, I'm going to go out the door. Now I'm going to reach back in and lock it. Like, you've got the window open. What's the point of locking it?
right? What's the point of locking it?
Just
And what's the
saying.
point of leaving the window open like it was and the screen out? Like you're not being that careful anyway.
Right. If he took the screen out on the sunroom and lights flipped on, he took off. So he left it that way. And then coming back a week later, taking the screen out, opening the door, crawling through the door. Yeah, I don't know why I'm hung up on that.
Because it's weird.
It is weird. And you would think whether the curtain rod fell before or after, upon entrance or leaving, you're making a lot of noise that you don't want a lot of noise. I mean, I would think. Okay, so I found the light on over the kitchen sink, and what happened to be blood spatter on the countertop around the sink. So as I walked through the kitchen toward the master bedroom, I noticed what appeared to be blood spatter on the floor near the hallway into the bedrooms. When we looked up the house and we saw pictures of the house, it was almost like a vestibule. Right? And then you had master bedroom and guest bedrooms. There were 3 bedrooms. So I'm assuming that it's in the vestibule before walking into the bedrooms.
Yeah, it was not a split plan. All the bedrooms were together, it seems.
Yeah.
in one
So
side
it
of the
was
house.
a violent crime. And if Helen never left the bedroom, we don't know. If it happened in the bedroom, then that's actually the killer transferring blood throughout the house. So the report continues. I walked directly through the kitchen and stepped about 2 feet into the master bedroom and saw the victim lying on the floor along the back wall between the bed and the closet, semi-clad and covered with blood. There were documents strewn about the floor, and it appeared a struggle had taken place in the room. Now, so documents, where did the documents come from? Was it something that was a sacking after he did the murder?
Right. Was it just things on her dresser?
Was that
maybe?
stuff that he had gone through? Or you're right, was it on the nightstand? Like a lamp was on the bed and a nightstand appeared to have been thrown into the southeast corner of the room. There was blood on the wall above the head of the bed and on the pillows. So he apparently, in the struggle, he grabbed, I say he, why do I keep doing that, Steph? We don't know if it's a girl or a guy, but it's somebody that's strong, grabbed the nightstand and flung it diagonally into the other corner of the room. Deputy Norman met with me and we began to check the remainder of the house. We began by entering the closet door of the bedroom to the northwest. I noticed that it appeared that persons had entered this room and had moved items in the closet. Interesting. Persons?
I guess at that point, if you're doing
don't
the
know.
initial report, yeah, you don't know if it was one or multiple.
That's true. We then walked down the hall into the living room and dining room, which did not appear to have been disturbed. After ensuring the house was clear, we exited and conducted a cursory security inspection of the exterior of the home and surrounding property. I observed that the doors to the laundry room were left open on the north side of the carport area, but an adjoining storage closet to the west was padlocked. I then began the administrative tasks of setting up and securing the crime scene and making necessary notifications. Deputy Ragley was directed to place crime scene tape around the perimeter of the house while D.S. Armour began compiling a crime scene entry log. Dispatch was asked to conduct the on-call detective and crime scene unit. When Detective Hart arrived, I briefed him and accompanied him through the area briefly and turned the scene over to him and Sergeant Hyde, who had arrived in the interim. A horrific crime that happened in our community. The 15th of July, 2006, on an 87-year-old woman asleep in her bed. This perpetrator came in, viciously attacked her. Why? We do not know. This is a person we want off the streets, not in anybody's community, whether he's in our community now or not. It's important that our community look at the facts of this case, put them fresh in our memories, especially if you lived over by the old Dodgertown Country Club area. Because I don't know, Stephanie, do you remember your childhood neighborhood? I do, like it's the back of my hand.
I do, and I have randomly before gone back to Google Maps and looked at it and gone, oh, wow, look, they built all that there. That's not there anymore, blah, blah, blah. So it does. It brings up memories to look at that area again.
Funny thing, my brother was just here, and we're 6 years apart. We were laughing because we were talking about our neighbors and what their names were that lived across the street, next to them, next to them, next to them. So anybody that lived there as a child even, that grew up there around this time, I know I could think back and come up with somebody that may, I would think, be able to do something like this. You know, that odd person or that person that showed a side of themselves that was just peculiar and creepy in some way. And those details, if you have them and lived in Dodgertown area near the country club at this time, and they had actually taken the country club down, but you know the area that we're talking about, that if you could just reach out to Indian River Sheriff's detectives with that information, they will investigate the personality of that type of perpetrator would more than likely not be normal.
No, that's clearly antisocial behavior. So I think the question that we're trying to ask is, did anybody around that time, around that area, stick out that had such antisocial behavior qualities? Which, by the way, antisocial behavior, I feel like that term gets used as being, oh, I don't want to socialize. But it's more to do with
peculiarities like killing animals, having a fascination about death,
being destructive,
right?
Just causing harm to others,
lack of
and yourself.
Respect to maybe a certain sex or the elderly,
group of people, right?
People in general, no respect for life, right? And if it was overkill, then there was some sort of fantasy killing to it, I would assume, you know?
Right, perhaps because of who Helen was, specific to that person, or maybe just because she was an easy target.
Yeah, I think most people like this are cowards, and they're not going to attack a 6'5" man like that, right? They're going to make sure that they can do it. But once again, with the overkill, I mean, that wasn't necessary. So you have to think about that.
This is part 3, interview with law enforcement, and today we're sitting with Indian River County Sheriff's detectives that were assigned to the case.
So we're here today with Detective Chris Casaneri. a retired detective from the Indian River Sheriff's Department, and Sergeant Greg Farless. And we're going to be discussing the crime scene and what they had gathered from their words, because they've experienced this throughout the last 18 years. This case has been worked. So, Chris, I know you were not the first detective on the case, and I believe that was Chief Kyle King. Did he ever share with you the impressions upon arriving at the scene, what his impressions were?
Yeah, well, if I remember correctly, I got there that night. There were already several detectives and deputies on scene, and we had a briefing on exactly what was going on that night.
What were their impressions of the scene? What was the kind of feedback that you got that made you realize, this was an important case?
The basics were, we had an elderly woman that had been beaten to death in her home, and, we were starting a neighborhood canvass, and that was the beginning of my part in the investigation that night.
That alone, being that she was in her home where she should have been safe, 87 years old, what kind of person would do that,
Right.
Could you take us back to the early days of the investigation, and what were the primary leads at the time?
The biggest part of the initial investigation was that neighborhood canvass street, that street that it happened on, all adjacent streets. I mean, within, I don't know how many blocks, we probably canvassed out at least 4 or 5 blocks in all directions.
And just trying to see if anybody had seen anybody around that time or proximity to that time that were...
Yeah, correct, because I believe the last time she was seen alive, she'd been out to dinner that night before with her son and daughter-in-law, and got dropped off about 8:30 that Friday night before, and then she was found the next day, I believe it was around noontime on Saturday. So you had, 12, 16 hours of
that
sometime that the
that
crime
timeline,
occurred.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of something that maybe somebody was watching and knew she was alone. So possibly somebody may have seen that. So those were the kind of questions that you were asking the neighbors, and just if they
Right.
had
The
seen
initial
somebody.
thing, we're trying to say any strange vehicles, any cars in her driveway, anything, anything out of the ordinary.
What was the biggest challenge that you faced in the initial stages of the investigation? What was a big challenge that you all were trying to overcome to get some results?
My part of the investigation was just that first day or two, assisting with the neighborhood canvass, and then I wasn't one of the primary detectives that were assigned to the case initially. Account for everybody in that neighborhood and adjacent streets and their whereabouts for that 18-hour period, like I said, that we know that the crime happened.
Can you describe what type of evidence was collected at the scene and how it influenced the direction that the case took?
As far as evidence, I didn't even go in the house the night that this happened, the night we discovered it. Like I said, I was part of the canvassing team. So as far as any evidence collected, that would be our crime scene guys. I can't...
A large amount of evidence that was
Yeah,
collected.
if I remember, crime scene was in the house for at least, I think it was 3 to 4 days.
When I read the first responders' reports, the deputies that had first arrived, something that struck me that I want to ask about is that the killer had come in through a carport door, and he had removed a screen, and he opened that window, and he came in through that window. And when he left, he did the same thing. And the reason that I ask that is that Doug McPherson reached in and unlocked the door. So he never unlocked the door. Why do you suppose he would do that?
Yeah, it's a good question, but it's, I guess, just as easy to go out through that the window's already open, as far as, guess he could have unlocked the door and gone out the door, but, you figure it's quieter to go back out that open window.
It actually would have been
closing any doors or
noisier. He knocked down a rod, and which she had to at that point be awakened by it, the curtain rod. I mean, to me, if I was doing that, I'd reach in, unlock the door, open the door, and come in. I ask myself why, and then the curtain comes down, the rod comes down, he goes out that way, and then when he's leaving...
You're assuming the rod came down when he went through and he didn't just take it, It's a chance it didn't make any noise at all. And again, if it's, you're a small guy, that window's already open, you're just going back out the same way you came in.
Yeah, it seems odd to me. I was just very curious about that.
That's true. So there was a mess and the curtain rod was on the floor, but that doesn't mean that it necessarily fell on the floor. So that's interesting to note. So where do you think that Helen actually confronted her killer?
That would have been in the bedroom.
Oh,
Bedroom.
so she was
That-
either hiding
well,
there
it-
or still in her bedroom.
It appears that was where the initial confrontation took place, yes.
But now there was blood splatter or spatter at the kitchen sink. So did the fight, it started in the bedroom, or is that him coming to clean up?
I would assume that's from cleaning up, yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't appear that she ever left the bedroom.
The details of the murder haven't been released, but can you provide insight into how much time the killer spent at the scene before and after the murder? Did he take his time?
Well, it's all conjecture, but in my opinion, he was in there for quite a long time. Not your average, like you would expect if this was some random burglary and somebody came in that wasn't familiar with the area and this happened unexpectedly, you would expect somebody to get out of there as quick as possible and make a run for it.
Yeah.
I think whoever did this knew there was nobody else living there. She lived alone. It was the middle of the night. He had ample time to clean up. He could take hours, take his time, calm down, do what he needed to do.
Which do you believe that was a robbery, or was it more?
As far as the motive, robbery could have been a motive. It's possible. Could have been just a thrill-seeking thing.
Okay, well, that was the reason for the question, because I would think as a robbery, you get in, she's 87, doesn't need to be overkill. You get in, you get the stuff you're going to sell or money or whatever, and you're out. You don't spend a lot of time there. So if that's the case, do you believe that this personality, in y'all's experience, do you believe that this person could do it again?
Always a possibility, yeah.
We have Sheriff Eric Flowers with us.
I know those guys are being tight-lipped about stuff too, because they're the guys with all the secrets about the case, and there are some things that obviously we're still holding close to the vest. So it may come across as though, I don't want to say it seems like we don't know, but there are some times where we don't always want to show our hand.
Absolutely.
And so this is still a very active and very sensitive case for us. And so I just want people who listen to your podcast and who are participating in this to understand that, this is one of our most high-profile cases that we have.
Absolutely.
This is an elderly lady in a community that's a predominantly elderly community. People still talk about this. Where I go, everywhere I go.
I never forgot it.
No, nor have I. And everywhere you go, people will ask, have you solved the case of that poor little old lady? Have you solved that case? And this is one of those ones that, we all know somebody in our community that looks like Helen McPherson, that lives like Helen McPherson, that's part of our community. And it's a terrible tragedy. And it's one that I hope that while I'm sheriff, we get to solve. This one for me hits home because I was still a young deputy. What is it, 05 that she's killed? 06 that she's killed. I was a young deputy. I started in 03, and I had just gotten selected to go into our undercover drug unit. And so the proximity of her house to what we reference as our 101 zone, our Gifford zone, that's where I worked as a new guy. And I would have been the first responder on that case. And so I had just gotten transferred not even a month before to our undercover drug unit when she was killed. And the first thought on my mind was I would have been first on scene to that. I would have been the first one that was out there. And so that's always stuck with me. And then I was very fortunate in my time in the drug unit that they dedicated some resources to this case maybe a year later. Chris, I think it was about a year later when we did that little task force over in crime scene in the little area between Ross's office and the conference room. Yeah. And they put together a group of us that were a little more technical. There was still some detectives who were going out and canvassing and doing those things, but I was working like phone records at the time and things that I was doing as part of my drug investigations to see if there was anything there. And obviously, cell phone technology in 06 is different than it is in today's age, right? Now we have license plate readers, we have, geo mapping, we have all the things that we can do now. None of that existed back in 06. We were still using Nextels. We were still, doing all those things. And so unfortunately, none of that resulted in anything that helped the case. But the efforts that happened back then are still things that we look back on and are a critical component to our case. The interviews that were done, with a variety of people who were in the area at the time, from lawn maintenance to, other types of workers,
like
all kinds of people.
Comcast, did she have appliance people?
We blanketed all of that stuff at the time. We went back and talked to all of those folks. We talked to anybody who was in the air that was working pest control, lawn people. We talked to, there was even because in that area where she's at is not far from where Dodger Pines was. And that was right after all of that stuff had been cleared. And so it was, people on four-wheelers in the area, any kind of complaints that we had anywhere in that area got completely canvassed. Follow-up within the year of her homicide. And obviously in the days after, there was a lot of follow-up that happened, and we worked that case hard. But over time, we constantly go back and visit those things. And, we have our persons of interest in this case. But we follow the facts, right? And we follow what we know. And so until we're 100% on something, we're going to keep our minds open. And that's with any case, right? We stay with all possibilities. And so there are going to be times where, you asked a question about coming through the window, and Chris says, well, you're assuming that he busted it down, right? So we never make assumptions on any of this stuff. That could have happened on his way out. It doesn't mean it happened on his way in. It could happen on his way out. There's so many alternative potentials. And when you have a massive crime scene, you can't make assumptions. Right. You can't go out and say, well, we know this. We don't know anything. We weren't there. Until somebody tells us I was there and this is what happened and this is what I did, we're going on a lot of assumptions. And so we always go back and look at those things. The crime scene photos are a huge deal in this case. Processing the evidence is a huge deal in this case. And obviously technology that's come along to help us is a really big deal.
Stephanie didn't know about the case.
Okay.
And when I told her about it and she looked it up, she's like, oh my goodness, that I think that it's so important that I know that everything that I've read has been the same thing. She was brutally, beaten and strangled, but nothing else has been said that I think that from what I remember from my radio reports, I did share it with you, Greg, there's more to that description. And I think that as it touched me, I think it would touch somebody, even somebody that knew that killer that he may have shared with, to know how violent it was and make them say, I've got to get this guy. I got to turn him in. Mm-hmm. So my hope is that we get something from you all that's a little more than what's been said, just a little more to tantalize and bring the awareness to exactly what happened to this woman and why. This person doesn't need to be in any community. And we need to get them off the streets as soon as possible, and we need their help.
We've seen cases across the nation that have been solved using genetic DNA, using, touch DNA, and a variety of different other technologies that are still growing and we're still learning about. And you're absolutely right. This is a very horrific crime scene. There's no doubt about it. It's one of the worst things that you could see. And I wouldn't want anybody to sit there and look at those photos because it's a terrible, terrible circumstance. This is somebody's grandmother, right, who's been brutally beaten. Just brutally beaten. And you're right that the person who did this absolutely needs to be held accountable for it, but probably has been involved in other things. And I can't speculate on those, but when you see these types of horrendous crimes, either they've worked their way up to it, they've committed other crimes, and this is the peak for them, or they've done other things like abuse animals or abuse other people or, other types of deviance. And so this is that kind of case. This is definitely that kind of case. And if somewhere along the line our evidence leads us to somebody that, maybe isn't on our radar, that maybe was passing through town at the time.
That was my next question. Transient.
Yeah, that's
truck driver.
We've never ruled that out, right? We have our persons of interest. We have people that we've interviewed over the years that we've spent time on. But it very well could be somebody that's never been on our radar. That's the evidence that is out there. We've looked into, and we're going to continue to process that evidence. And I'm confident that the technology is going to catch up to help us make this case. I really am. I hope these guys feel the same way, but I
that's
do.
a question that I have too. You all have just solved an old cold case. And there had to be DNA on this case, right? That was sent in. And have we received that back? There has to be DNA.
We do
now
have
that-
evidence. It's yes. I wish I could comment more on that, but the answer
We
is
can take
yes.
it out.
Yeah, we got excited about a fingerprint years ago, but ended up being
A dead end?
no, I'm sorry, DNA,
Yeah, DNA.
sweat.
Yeah.
That was from a crime scene detective, but you're in a house sweating. So, but anyway,
You know, I don't know if you're aware, but we recently received a $500,000 cold case grant from the federal.
I did hear that, yes.
And as part of that, it allows us to process things. So we have hundreds of pieces of evidence from this crime scene, hundreds of pieces. We have been systematically, and it's very expensive. So in 2006, DNA, you know, what OJ's in 96, 97, you got to have a pretty substantial sample to be able to process in 2006, right? Like if it was a hair, it had to have the roots. That technology has evolved so much further that you don't need all that stuff anymore, that any little scrap, that it's even as much as touching the table, we can process that and do it. But those are still very expensive processes to do. And so of the hundreds of pieces of evidence that we have, it's still something that we're still processing. I mean, we're still working through all that. I wish I could sit here and tell you right now that we had processed every piece of evidence for this, but it's just not something. It takes time, it takes money, and it takes people dedicated to that. And so it's still a very active case for us. I mean, our cold case team, this is one of their priorities, and it's one that we're working through. And even if it's something that we've processed, we still go back and process it with new technology. So we may have processed it in 2006 to see if we had blood sample, something on there, but it could go back for touch DNA. It could go back for other types of DNA processing.
Right.
And so we're in no way or shape or form done with this case whatsoever. It's still a very
No,
active
it sounds
case.
like you're pretty confident that you have enough evidence that eventually you're going to get this person. How have you prioritized McPherson case among the other cold cases? Would you say that's number one?
Obviously, solvability factors go into what we're working on. I can tell you right now, the Stephanie Jackson case is at the top of the cold case teams. I think it's one that we believe is solvable.
Yeah.
But right now, Stephanie Jackson is at the top. Mm-hmm. And once we get that one cleared off, then we go back to McPherson.
The time of death, there was a coroner's that put it between, most likely, on July 15th between 12 a.m. and 5 a.m. Did the coroner test, you said she had dinner that night at Swenson's. Was there a test regarding the digestion?
I think that estimate by the coroner is as close as you're going to get, up from 1 to 5. Everybody's digestive times are different, and age plays into that. A lot of things play into it. I think whatever he put in there is probably as close a time as we're going to get.
Okay. The reason for asking, I think, is because we know that her son saw her last around 8:30 or so.
Correct.
And so our next question would be, well, why not 9 p.m., 10 p.m.? Like, did this person go in immediately after? We don't know, obviously.
yeah,
Why 12?
when they got back from eating dinner, they always sat in the living room and watched Wheel of Fortune or Family Feud for 30,
Which
40
ends
minutes.
at 8 o'clock.
And that's when, right. And then they left the house around 8:30, I believe it was.
This was a Friday night?
It's a Friday night. Doug, her son, and Wanda took her out to dinner at the same place every Friday, never missed. Mm-hmm. So, which was Swenson's?
Swenson's.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought that with the fact that she had dinner, that would be a really clear cut if he did take those tests. So, something to look at.
She had heard some noises in the lead up to this.
A week before, found
10
a
days before.
screen taken out of her house, and she does what any good mom does. She calls her son instead of us, and the son comes over there, finds the screen, heard some noise in the back patio, and he actually finds a screen where someone tried to come in.
Were you aware of that? You know
I
about that?
was, yeah.
Which-
Do you feel pretty strongly that that was the same person?
That's my opinion. I do,
Absolutely.
and I feel like the person that went in that house is familiar with her, or familiar with that neighborhood.
Do you believe that that person was a bit of a voyeur? Do you think that the killer was scoping her house out and watching?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah.
The family made mention of the fact that she had made statements that she heard the noises. I think it was Doug that came over and found the screen, and she had become kind of afraid a little bit. I mean, she wasn't afraid, but she was aware. She was, for her age, she was still very vibrant and very much aware that something was going on.
Right.
Right. And so when the coroner says, when they say, you know, between 1 and 5, you know, I agree with Chris. I think she went to bed that night, that she came back from dinner at Swenson's. She got comfortable, but I do believe that she had been aware that somebody had been around there and that something was going on with that screen taken out, with the conversations that she had with family. And I think that person did show up between that 1 and 5 window. And I think that's when the homicide happened. I really do. I think I think that person moved under the cover of night. And I think that they knew that 1 to 5 in that window, everybody, it's a quiet neighborhood. We went out and sat in the neighborhood. We had our SWAT team sit in the woods and listen and all those things in the days after. And so it's a very quiet neighborhood. And when he starts moving around, like you said, he doesn't want people to know that he's moving around. He doesn't want people to know he's taking the screen off. He's going to make a lot of noise in whatever he does. And so 1 to 5 is prime time to do that, when people are in that deep REM sleep, when the neighbors aren't going to hear something.
Well, let me ask this. She had a dog that had died 2 weeks prior, correct? Natural causes?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing like that.
So that also stands to reason that he was watching, because it's easier to come into a house without an animal, right?
It's
So
easier
he knew
to
the
get
dog was
near.
gone.
You know, if you get near a house and there's a yapping dog and the dog is no longer
Less
yapping,
noise.
you know that it's probably safe to
Right,
proceed
that
with
fits
whatever
with
you're going to do.
somebody
That's watching.
in the general area
And
that
knew.
knows there's no dog anymore. And as far as the time, before I forget, as far as the time and the coroner being right about the time, there was one bit of information I do remember on the canvas that a neighbor had heard a strange noise about 2 o'clock in the morning that night. It sounded like a pipe or a piece of metal hitting the ground, which would have
And what time was that?
coincided
2
around. It was
o'clock?
around 2 in the morning. I
That
believe,
would have
is
been
when
the
a kid
curtain.
was a young kid that lived in the area that was excited. They were going out boating the next day, so he was all excited about going out on this new boat. But he woke up in the middle of the night and
To that noise.
heard some noise. Yeah, heard a strange noise outside, and I believe it was right around 2 o'clock. So, and that might have been our guy coming or going.
8:30 in July, there is still a hint of light out.
Yeah,
So it makes sense that it's the later the better.
Well, let me ask about the weapon or the object analysis that while the murder weapon was never found from anything that I can read, were there any other objects in the house that were suspected to be used or handled by the killer?
Can't say.
We can't talk about that right now.
Well, let me ask it a little bit differently. So she was brutally beaten. Was she beaten with an object?
Let's just leave it at brutally beaten. We have no concrete evidence to be able to support whether or not she was beaten with an object or with a fist. So right now, as far as the public goes, we're leaving that as undetermined at this time.
Whatever was used, it was overkill. Because, like you said, it's an 87-year-old lady. I mean, if you're not to be crude, but if you want to kill, all you got to do is
That's
choke
it.
her for 20 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
She's dead. That's all you had to do.
Exactly.
You didn't have to do what they did to her.
Right.
So, question about the blood spatter analysis. Can you share any details on what the blood spatter patterns in the kitchen and the bedroom indicate about what happened?
I would say no, you can't.
The blood splatter in the bedroom is pretty much equalizes what we found with someone being beaten.
You want to bring the mic down the...
Well, I wasn't even a part of this.
Oh, congratulations. Welcome aboard.
Lieutenant Michael Pierce, you're absolutely a part of it.
The blood patterns that we found are conclusive to what we feel happened in the bedroom where she was beaten. The blood that we found in other parts of the house, we feel was her blood, and that the person had used the kitchen sink to wash anything off his hands.
Did Helen fight? Did she put up a fight?
I think so.
Were you able to gather blood, the killer's blood, from the scene or from her body?
No tests have come back stating that, and we ran everything, all the blood drops that we found, all the blood that we found. You got to remember that we spent 3 days going through this house. We searched every inch of that house. We tore pieces of carpet out. We took pieces of tile. We absolutely just scoured that house from top to bottom to try to find anything that would lead us back to a suspect. At this time, we have not had anything come back that points us in the direction of one individual. Once again, we're still in the process of retesting those as technology advances. It's an open theory as to what happened, who it was, who could have done this, what their motives were. We have our own feelings as to what occurred, but we try not to get hyper-focused on a theory because we tend to get blinders on if we do that, and it prevents us from looking at the bigger picture. Our job as detectives is to basically analyze everything, look at everybody, and then one by one rule them out. We've done that, obviously, with most people involved in this case. I know there was some talk about whether or not we checked family members. All those have been, checked out and cleared. There was some talk about years ago about neighbors. We've ruled them out, and we have checked their alibis out, and everything that we can determine at this time have been verified. We are in the process still of sending evidence, trace evidence from this case, to laboratories and having them try to do DNA testing and stuff like that. Unfortunately, nothing has come back yet to indicate one specific person. That's kind of where we're at with this case.
Mm-hmm. Has anybody come forward saying that someone confessed to them or that they overheard something? What has the community brought to you as far as any evidence that they may have that has helped?
The community back then was a lot smaller than it is now. We put flyers up, and everybody was willing to put flyers up in their businesses. The media was very good at putting, doing stories on it. We basically blasted her picture out to everybody to see, begging for people to come forward. So the community support was good. Has anyone come forward and said, I know who did it, and I heard them confess it, or I know something about this case that you don't? Not yet. So we're still hoping, after all these years, to keep it fresh and continue to ask for people, no matter how small a detail it is, come forward with it. Because working some of these cases is a lot like a jigsaw puzzle. One piece by itself does not make the picture, but with a bunch of other different pieces, it leads us down that road. A lot of cases, not just here, but all across the world, are solved with some of the most non-significant details that somebody comes forward with, even sometimes years later, and says, I did see that person, or I did hear something about that. That leads us in the, it basically proves that we're going in the right direction, or it corrects our vision as to, where we're going. Maybe we're going down the wrong road. Maybe we're looking at the wrong guy. Help us determine that.
2026 will be 20 years for this case. So we're at 18 years right now. In 18 years, we've had more than one person of interest. Okay? We've had more than one person of interest. Along that journey, you have friends, family members, people who always get, because we don't just interview the person of interest. We look into their entire life. We look into everything about them. Some people, totally supportive. There's no way my friend, family member, coworker, whatever could ever be responsible for this. And there are others who go, he's a little creepy.
Yeah.
I think you might be onto something here.
Right.
And we have that with every person of interest.
Yeah.
That's the unfortunate part, is that, with all the people that we've looked at over the years, every single one of them in some way or another fits into the puzzle piece, right? And you go, well, that piece might fit. That piece might fit. And so that's why I say we let the evidence take us where it leads us. And so at this moment, we can't say that any one of these people of interest are 100% the person, but we can say that based on the evidence that we have, the facts that we have, that they're a possibility, that they're on our radar, and that there are family members or friends or workers or somebody in their life who also said, yeah, you probably should take a second look at that person. And so we've not ruled any of those people out. And we're actively spending time on all those people at any given time, where we're keeping updated. Where are they living? What are they doing? How has their life changed? Have they been involved in any traumatic incidents? Anything like that. Because if they are the person, as we said before, are they going to strike again? Are they, are they going to be involved in something else?
Well, this type of crime, I think, lends itself to that person always looking to follow it themselves, too. And I believe that person will be listening to this podcast. Yeah, so Greg, you've worked this case the longest, correct?
Chris.
Oh, Chris has.
I think Chris, and then I had it, and then we both worked it
Okay.
together. So.
But how would you say, Greg, that it's evolved over time? Do you feel like you're getting narrowed down on who this perpetrator is?
I think so. With the advancement of DNA and the new testing that came out, that we're having more items tested as we can and retested, I believe we're heading that direction, yes.
The person of interest, let's say they've moved and they're living somewhere else, and you're going to be looking at where he's working now and who he socializes with now, and be able to maybe talk to some of the people that are in that person's life at this point to try to get more information, just in case. Do you follow those people of interest from state to state, county to county? Yes, everybody's shaking their head, yes.
Yes.
They're really in your scope.
We know where they all live and who
Focus.
they hang out with, yes.
Great.
Can you talk about your relationship with the McPherson family and how it has impacted your work on this case?
Wonderful family. And anybody and everybody that's worked this case, we've all felt the same. That could have been our mom, our grandmother. Didn't have to happen. Female in her home that thought she was safe or felt safe. And I've gotten close with Wanda and Doug, her son, and very good people. And you can't help to, for me personally, and not trying, but you can't help to feel guilty about this, because that's our job to solve these things. But we're getting closer. I will tell you this: when me and Detective Kastner had the case, we had detectives assigned to this case and always working it. But we didn't have a cold case committee at that time, and we brought that up to Sheriff Flowers. And guess what? We got it. And now we have a team of retired prosecutors, current prosecutors, retired judges, lab techs, retired detectives, current detectives that meet, and this case has always been looked at. It's always been worked on, and so many different eyes on it. He even started a program where we had a case where the police academy kids review stuff and solve the case. So that's something that's been going on for years now. But every detective I talk to, they're all important to us. But this one, at that age, grandma, didn't have to happen that way. It gets to all of us.
So, as sheriff, I have the pleasure of hosting 2 different events every year. One is our Tree of Remembrance at Christmas time, which happens behind the courthouse. And the other one is our Victims Vigil that happens over on Memorial Island every year to remember the victims of crime. And the Christmas one is specifically for families, because we know you're going to celebrate another Christmas out without your loved one. And the other one is during Victims' Rights Week, where we come together and we read off the names of all of the victims. And prior to becoming sheriff, I attended all those with Sheriff Lohr, and I watched his interaction with the McPhersons over the years. And of course, I had the same kind of interactions with them now. And so for me, as we're closing out these cold cases, it's been a great thing to be able to give some closure to family members and seeing their reaction to the closure and seeing how they relate to it. But I watch a lot of these shows, and you see, recently I got to meet with the brother of Richard Razkowski, the only deputy ever killed in the line of duty here at the sheriff's office. And he stood there and told me, my parents died of a broken heart. We never had Christmas after my brother was killed. And so for me, I so desperately want to give closure to Doug and Wanda, because they're the family, the face of this case to me. And they're not getting younger. Every year when I see them twice a year, I go, we got to get this wrapped up for them, because they live with it and they suffer every day. Right. And so it's my hope that during their lifetime, we're going to be able to close this case and to give them closure, because I don't know the next generation of family and I don't know who will come at that point. But I want to see them see this case through because they deserve it.
Okay, so each year, interviews and surveillance are conducted. Can you share any significant findings or leads from these annual efforts? Anything of recent years has been new evidence given? Added another person? Okay, come on, Greg.
We really can't say that, but I will say something. One of the persons of interest, and that's why anybody listening, I want you to really think about this, because there was a Dodger Pines Country Club that was right near Helen McPherson's home. The reason I know that, because or familiar with that, in 1991, I was a busboy there when I was going through the police academy on the weekends to make some extra money. That's right around the corner from her house, so you can kind of, you don't know the area, you can think of that and realize she didn't live far from there. But one of the persons of interest that we have many, lived in the proximity of that neighborhood. And that's why we need people that are listening to anything. It could be anything that you knew a person was, I'm using an example, breaking into a car a week ahead of time that you caught that you didn't report it, or you saw somebody that you kind of knew that frequent that neighborhood or came in and out and saw something suspicious, but not enough to call the cops. Because one of the persons of interest, like I said, stayed in close proximity of the victim's house. And to me, that's something that to get everybody's thinking caps on as far as any new leads, as far as that goes.
And let me just say her address, 2666 49th Avenue, over by where the old Dodger Town.
43rd Avenue, you head west, right? So if you're going to Target, you're going to go west on 26th Street, and you're going to pass right by 49th Avenue. She's right there on the right-hand side. She's on the north side of the road, and she's on the east side of the road when you turn down. So that is the right address. I mean, I drive by it all the time. Every time I drive by 49th Avenue, I think about Helen McPherson.
Yeah.
Every single time I drive by.
And was there a park or something near there that people used to walk through her yard to go to?
There was a lot of wooded area behind her house, and I think there was even some homeless people in that area too. But that was a good point that I want to bring up, is especially if you had young kids that lived and played in that neighborhood, there was some kind of paintball fort that they would go play in. So that's something, of course, everybody's older now, but if you had young kids back in that time, even they're adults now, talk to them, and they were young, they might have shielded this from them, or they didn't know too much about it, but they're older now, where they might have seen somebody suspicious while they're playing in their porch that could bring something up, like, oh yeah, there was this person that we saw that we didn't, So there was like a paintball park and a fort kids would go and play near her home.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, that's good to know. Given the ongoing efforts to solve this case and bring justice for Helen, Sheriff Flowers, is there any message you would like to send directly to the person responsible for her murder?
I'm confident that the person out there who killed Helen McPherson knows that we are actively looking for them. I'm confident that they know the evidence that we have against them. I'm confident that they know that technology is coming up quickly to catch them, and their best bet would be to get out in front of this and to come talk to us. When we prove this, it's going to be too late. When our technology comes up and we have a 100% match, I don't even want to talk to the person because we're just going to send them right off to prison. There's not going to be any conversation. So if they want to get this off their chest, if they want to go ahead and start talking about this, now is the time, not when we come to get you. Because when we come to get you, the time for talking is long gone. And so that would be my message to this person, because they know they left behind evidence. They know they were sweating that night. They know that they touched something that's left DNA. They know all of the evidence that we've collected and what we know. They're the only ones that know what we know. The other side of this is if there's a family member or friend or somebody out there who they have confessed to, I'd tell you to come forward now, because if we're able to prove on the other side that you knew something and you didn't help us and you weren't part of this, we're going to be coming after you too. If there's somebody out there that's harbored this person or allowed this to happen, that's going to be problematic for us. We're not going to be happy about that. And so we do believe that that this person has told somebody and that somebody else knows. And now's the time to come forward and let us know, because every single day as technology gets better, your days are numbered. The clock's ticking. We're going to come get you.
Part 4, Crime Prevention Tips. What's important that we can do now, that we are in control of today, is what we can do to prevent crimes from happening, or at least people taking advantage of us, taking advantage of vulnerable family members and the elderly.
Right.
And we have Sheriff Eric Flowers on a few tips on how to do that.
So the question is, what advice would we give the public to protect themselves on this? So in 2006, the technology that's available today at a very low cost was not available, right? So Ring doorbells, floodlight cameras, all of these things are now battery powered. They're relatively inexpensive. For $300, you could have 3 cameras up protecting your house with no problem. The great thing about those cameras is you can connect into our network. Ring, we send out an alert that says, hey, we know you have a Ring doorbell in our area. We've had a crime. Can you provide us with this? And so those are things that are helping us solve crimes now more than ever, right? The public and the things that they put in place help us solve more crimes than we ever will. And so by just putting up a couple Ring cameras, and I'm not brand specific, right? You can get Blink or any of the other cameras, but any of those work phenomenally with our system. Lighting is a big deal. If you look at your house, I would highly advise that everybody listening, turn your lights on inside your house at nighttime and go out to the street and look inside and see what you can see. Do you see your kids moving around? Do you see your loved ones moving around? Because what you're seeing is what bad guys are going to see when they're out there in the dark. And so having a knowledge of what your house looks like to the bad guys is a huge deal. And so we do a thing here where our team will actually come out and do a CPTED evaluation, crime prevention through environmental design. And so we can talk to you about, hey, your hedges are really preventing things, or maybe you need to add a hedge here to protect yourself. And so all those are critically important items. Our community services team is happy to help with that. And we're happy to give you a home inspection evaluation anytime you need it.
Yes. And I'd like to add, life alert bracelets are typically, you think of those for a medical situation. But what's nice about the life alert, if the person falls and is unconscious, they know the motion would bring people, would bring, help. Or if Helen had heard him coming in, if the curtain had fallen and she knew somebody was coming, she at least has that on her wrist that she could have pressed the button, again, alerting people that there was an emergency, and emergency services would have come.
Yeah. And so much like how Sheriff Eric Flowers mentioned, like in 2006, home technology for security was nowhere near where it is now. At least today, everything is so interconnected. Everything is connected to Wi-Fi, and we can all pretty much see what's going on from our smartphones. But I do also want to highlight the importance of good internet connection. No matter what brand of home cameras you have, they're pretty much useless if your internet connection sucks. So one thing that you can do that I think some people are not aware of is running an Ethernet cable directly to your camera. So maybe you only do it to one and it's your front door camera or whatever one you deem the most important. Maybe it's an indoor one, but you can run a cable so that that camera is always connected to internet and does not have to rely on Wi-Fi connection that might be spotty.
Yeah, that's very good regarding security. We have cameras in my mother's home because during the day there's a block of time that she might be alone. But we all can watch and make sure that she hasn't fallen or that type of thing. For the elderly, we need to protect them, or the disabled, we need to protect them. And so I think it's important that if you do have an elderly, aging parent that is refusing to, go somewhere and they want to live in their home, that's so important for security, for falling or for being attacked, because if Helen had that.
Right.
And I don't think that was available then,
No.
but those are the things that you can do to protect your loved ones. And I hope that this segment helps you feel secure in your own home. I want to give a big thanks to the Indian River County Sheriff's Office detectives for working with us on our podcast about the Helen McPherson murder, and also to thank Sheriff Eric Flowers for being a part of it. He added quite a bit.
And thank you so much to Doug and Wanda. They were just lovely people to meet.
Oh my goodness. I loved really learning who Helen was. I think that's very important to understand who the victim is. Sometimes that gets lost in the case itself, and I just enjoyed learning about her life.
And that Vietnam story was super sweet.
Yeah, that was amazing. I loved it.
If you'd like to get a hold of us for any new story suggestions, we welcome that. And the email is variedvoices@gmail.com.
And tune in for our next episode titled Voyeurism, Understanding the Psychology, Legal, and Personal Dimensions. Join us in this compelling episode as we delve into the complex and often misunderstood topic of voyeurism, from its psychological roots to its legal implications. We explore every facet of voyeuristic behavior and its impact on individuals and society.